Thank you. Alrighty. Thanks so much for everyone for being here today. We are very excited for our Lunch and Learn this month. We are going to be talking about resident governance in social housing and in housing in general. We are very excited to have Saunatina Sanchez here today to share all of the wisdom that she has accumulated from doing the work herself in her own building and in her own organization. Saunatina advocates for renters as a board member of Community Roots Housing, the affordable housing organization where she rents her home. As a member of the Transit Riders Union, she works at connecting the transportation, housing, and land use realms through coalition building with local and national organizations. And we are super excited to have her here because House Our Neighbors is entering into this space as well. For folks who aren't aware, resident governance is a huge motivation for us in House Our Neighbors. We very thoughtfully and intentionally wrote housing renter governance into the charter of the social housing developer in I-135. And we are excited because very soon there will be renters in social housing units this year. Pretty pumped. And we need to figure out a renter governance structure for them. So we're so glad to be in community with folks like Saunatina, who can help share her experience that we can learn from, and the social housing developer can learn from as we move into this cool world of making sure that social housing residents have meaningful say over the buildings that they live in, and have know that they have power over the full direction of the organization through our renter majority board. So with that, that's why we're here today. That's why we're excited to learn from Saunatina, and I'm going to pass it on over to her. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. I am very excited to present here today. Before I get started with my slide deck, I would like to encourage everybody to submit questions or comments, anything like that in the chat as I'm going through the presentation. I won't be monitoring the chat as I present. I want to get through it. And then afterwards, as Jeff said, I want to have a nice conversation, questions. You can ask me things specific to my organizing work and what I've done in community roots housing and in different levels of government. So with that, let's get started. Let's see if this works. All right. Can everybody see implementing resident management? Fabulous. All right. So this is the overview of what we're going to be going through today. So what roles does resident council play in an organization? What are the federal regulations around this work? Levels of resident representation. So board member versus jurisdiction-wide versus site-specific. My path in community roots housing in these different levels of representation. An overview of the toolkit published by HUD, and an introduction to each guide, a little bit of an overview of what each guide contains. Oh, I moved that around. Toolkit guided me to the laws, but I'm actually talked about the federal regulations earlier, so I forgot to move that around. And then resources to support you, and then obviously questions at the end. So hello, once again. My name is Saunatina Sanchez. I am a community organizer. I work in housing and transit justice. As an advocate for renters, I am a board member of Community Roots Housing Public Development Authority, and that is the affordable housing organization where I rent my home. As a member of the Transit Riders Union, I work at connecting the transportation, housing, and land use realms through coalition building with local and national organizations. So I basically want to make the daily lives of people in Seattle a nice experience, where you live, where you walk, how you get from neighborhood to neighborhood. And now, so let's chat about resident councils, because that's what we're here. So this is in the HUD regulations. HUD is the Housing and Urban Development department. It basically is the organization that provides support for housing on the federal government level. And so in their rules, they have stated that the role of a resident council is to improve the quality of life and resident satisfaction. Oh, that's not right. Yeah, sorry. The role of a resident council is to improve the quality of life and resident satisfaction and participate in self-help initiatives to enable residents to create a positive living environment for families living in public housing. Resident councils may actively participate through a working partnership with the housing agency to advise and assist in all aspects of public housing operations. And down at the end there, you will see a little number thing that, and that is referring to a, there we go. Sorry about that. Rules for public housing. So the Code of Federal Regulations are the laws of our nation. The Code of Federal Regulations is basically what are the laws that we go by. So most of the rules related to tenant participation in affordable housing, and this is specific to organizations that get funding from HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department. And so these rules, these laws around the organization being required to recognize your council are specific to HUD-funded buildings and properties. But that doesn't mean that these lessons won't work for you if you live in for-profit housing or another kind of landlord, resident, renter kind of situation. So there is a link on the screen, the ecfr.gov. So ecfr.gov is the whole Code of Federal Regulations, and the parts that relate to us are in Title 24, Part 964, Tenant Participation and Tenant Opportunities in Public Housing. So 24 CFR 96418.18. That is it, the regulation that involves the memorandum of understanding between a resident council and the public housing authority. I'll go through a lot of this in the future, but I just wanted to get this really clear in terms of like, you're protected. If you live in affordable housing, if your organization gets HUD funding, you have a right to organize, and HUD regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations says that that the organization, the housing authority, must recognize your right, and they must help you create these councils. So let's get into that. Oh, yeah, that's right. I put a slide on there. So all housing authorities, regardless of size, are required to permit residents to organize. They can't stop you from putting up flyers, having meetings, holding events. They must recognize the first duly elected resident council. We'll get into that in a little bit. So they can't, undercut a self-governed or self-formed group by something that they try to put in, or organize other residents as opposed to what you've done. So they must provide guidance to residents when requested in establishing and maintaining a resident council. And they must provide the resident council with information concerning the public housing authority's policies on resident participation and management. So these are things that all housing authorities that get money from HUD are required. There are other housing authorities, there's other things that only apply to proper organizations that have more than 250 units, but this applies to all. So why would you want to organize a resident council? Here are a few reasons that the HUD guide gives us. Build relationships and community between residents, ensure residents understand their rights and responsibilities. That got cut off, I'm sorry. Improve housing conditions and security, improve communication between management and residents, bring services and programs to the property, recreation, food, social services, health activities, and improve these programs that might already exist and impact and improve modernization or development. So there's lots of reasons, and you might have reasons that aren't on this list. And what we want is to support you in your particular situation in help developing a council in your location. So there are three different kinds of resident representation: site-specific, jurisdiction-wide, and board members. So site-specific seems very clear. One building or a particular property project, like, certain properties might have multiple buildings, but they're all as part of the same group. So, and you can call them pretty much whatever you want. Resident councils, tenant associations, resident organization, tenant union. I, with my neighbors, formed a tenant union. I know in the chat I saw somebody else as part of the Cedar Crossing Tenants Association. So these are all up to you to determine what you want to be called. Jurisdiction-wide. So individual buildings, individual properties can have a union, as can all of the properties that the Public Housing Authority, the Housing Authority, is in charge of. So group of residents from multiple buildings can come together and they can be created. This organization, this group can be created if there are already individual groups in the system or not. So there's lots of ways to go about creating a resident or a jurisdiction-wide group. And then there's board members. So the membership of the governing board of each public housing authority must contain not less than one eligible resident board member, with a few exceptions. And most of those exceptions deal with small, if the organization is very small. But let's get into these three a little bit more deeply. And I'm going to start with board member, because this one is one where I got a lot of support to create a jurisdiction-wide resident council, because I was able to get onto the board as the resident representative. And so this is, like I said, the rule that in the Federal Register, any resident can be on the board, and the housing authority cannot create rules that are only applicable to residents. And there were actually, when this rule was implemented in 1999, there were lots of property managers and housing authority people writing in comments against this rule to require a resident on the board, saying basically that residents weren't smart enough, they weren't enthusiastic enough, it would cause chaos, it would basically be all kinds of bad. And some of them were like, okay, well, if you have to do this, can we create rules so that residents have, like, a resident has to be this specific kind of person in order to be on the board? And HUD was like, no, you have to have a resident that represents your community on the board, and you cannot make specific rules to prevent that from happening. So yeah, if your group gets HUD money and they don't have a resident on the board, they're out of compliance. So second, like I said, I joined the board, and through my position, I was able to use the resources of the resident services that we get. We in order to create what we call in Community Roots Housing a resident advisory council. And at the moment, it's a 15 to 20 member body of residents, of renters, because we're all renters, who live in all the different we have 50 plus buildings, so it's not every single building, but it's a variety of buildings from around the region get together once a month and discuss issues. And this is again the Federal Register's rules around the role of a jurisdiction-wide council. So I specifically wanted to put this up because the HUD wants residents to have a say in all of these things. Like, this is one of my favorite things, including but not limited to occupancy, general management, maintenance, security, resident training, resident employment, social services, and modernization priorities. So basically, HUD is saying residents who live in the buildings should be a part of the decisions around how these properties are maintained and improved because it's their home. The housing authorities are required to schedule meetings between it and the jurisdiction-wide council. As I said, they can be created whether or not there are individual councils at different buildings, or it can be created right from the start, just as its own entity. And the housing authority must recognize it as the voice of authority-wide residents for input into housing authority policymaking. That can be also, all of these things can be kind of good and bad, because if you have a resident group that is kind of conservative or, who isn't as communicative, there's some challenges around who are the residents who are representing these things. And that's true with all of these kinds of things. The people who are part of the process really does impact the mood, the vibe of a group. And so, the more people who are saying we need to be collaborative, we need to be communicative, the more a group is going to be collaborative and communicative. And that's one of the things that I wanted to get to in terms of the site-specific councils. So these are really great places to develop skills. And as with most things, HUD has some recommendations on what is this for. And so a resident council, right, is designed to represent the interests of people who live in that building or on that site. And you need to keep people engaged, right? If the residents there's going to be different levels of interest in these kinds of organizations. And you folks who are in this meeting are probably amongst the higher of the enthusiastic. And it is our responsibility, it is our role as those who are interested in developing these groups to keep others engaged. And we don't know what's going on in people's lives. There might be people who are really interested in this kind of work, but they happen to be, going through an intense training program right now and do not have any time. But in a year, that intense training program is going to give them some skills they want to bring to the council and maybe make it better, right? Or probably make it better. So the people who are currently doing the work shouldn't feel like you're going to be the only ones always doing the work. A lot of succession planning is a big part of this kind of stuff. And one of the ways that it's suggested to do that is by setting up smaller groups. So committees, working groups, activities, campaigns, tasks. And these are all very specific things. So like a committee tends to be standing, right? You have a group of people who are working on the, keeping up with maintenance types things. There's working groups, a gardening group, for instance, and then there's activities, things like holding a cookout, or taking a trip, going on a hike, something like that. Campaigns are longer term types of activities. So if you want to improve something in your building, let's say you want to, if you have a patio, I have a patio in my building, and we want to, get a building, an awning, a gazebo, something covered so that we can enjoy things. So we would create a campaign around that. And then, that campaign would end once we've achieved our goal. And then tasks are obviously individual things that each of those different groups need to engage in. And some residents are going to be interested in leading, being a part of these groups on a regular basis. And some folks just want to do tasks. If they're like, oh, they're having a party, I don't want to be on the party planning committee. I don't want to be on events, but I like cooking. I like bringing stuff. And so you can set me down to, bring some food for the party. That's a task that I can do. So those are the different kinds of things that can work together in terms of building community, building leadership, and making your individual group really strong. So I like this quote from the HUD: to engage the most people, work to create tasks and roles where people can participate. Oops, sorry about that. Participate and gain experience and skills. So how would you want to be engaged with on this council and set that up? So my journey in community roots housing, as I was saying. So my group, I've been living in my building for about 15 years or so. And we happen to be in the neighbors in my building happen to be long-term tenants. And so when COVID hit, we kind of knew each other, but we hadn't really gotten in together as a solid group. And then COVID, one of my neighbors went to a Puget Sound tenant union training and used some of the skills, some of the resources that they provided to contact everybody in the building and invited us to a meeting that was on Zoom at the time, as you see, and from there, we created our tenants union. And then I was helped create a newsletter for a while. We created a gardening group. We still regularly have monthly tenant union meetings. And in those meetings, we discuss how we might potentially one day create a resident management corporation. So these are the kinds of things it's in our building, connected with my neighbors. And because of all of that stuff with the newsletter and hanging out with my neighbors, one of my neighbors saw a flyer that Community Roots Housing Management put up all around, saying that the resident board member position was open. And it, what he suggested that I apply for it because I'm this kind of person who talks about these kinds of things. And I asked for his help in applying for things because that's not a skill I actually have a lot of. So that was one of those aspects of this work, is knowing that I had my community to support me in this work really helped me come in strong to the board. And in that application, in the cover letter, I made it clear that I was joining the board in order to develop this jurisdiction-wide resident council. And part of the reason I also felt confident in doing that in Community Roots Housing is because just before COVID hit, the organization was already having some meetings around creating a group like this. So I knew I was already in a supportive enough environment that I could really push hard to get it done. And so at the same time, if it wasn't for the HUD toolkit that I'm going to show you, I wouldn't have I don't know if I would have been able to create that group, because that toolkit is what guided me to be able to say, you are legally required to help me do this. And if you don't, I'm gonna, do it myself. And then you'll be, you won't like that. But then, we found, like I said, the funding in the resident services resources. We hired a consultant to help us develop the program. And now our resident council, resident advisory council, has been operating for a little over a year as a body. It took about a year to develop the bylaws before that. So that was what the consultant was for, to help the group form, develop bylaws, and then establish itself, create the charter, and then now it is engaged in activities, and that is still a developing process. And I'm emphasizing this point in terms of it's been a long-term process, right? So it's been 3 years since the first group of residents from around our organization got together to say, yes, we want to get together and form this organization, to now when we're just now starting to like create committees and really get into the work of advising. So it's a process, and it might feel like nothing's happening. And then you'll look back and, 3, 4 years later, there's a group of neighbors around you also with lots of opinions, and you have a community, and it's great. So this is that toolkit I was mentioning. So on the board or the screen, you see a website called hudexchange.info. And there's a lot of guides, lots of stuff around housing at that website. But you want to go to the resident toolkit. You can use the search bar, or you can go to this exact URL, hudexchange.info/programs/resident/housing/resident/overview-and-commenters. It's very frustrating. I think you don't even need the end of the common terms thing, but yeah, the toolkit. What's in the toolkit? Well, there are 4 parts, and each of the 4 parts incredibly valuable. So there are guides for organizing and running an effective resident council. There's sample customizable documents to help you formally establish and run your resident council. There are tools for the effective use of tenant participation funds. And this is one thing that is very exciting to many people, is if your organization gets money for resident services, you can get some of that money for your organization if you appropriately create your council and create what is called a memorandum of understanding between your group and the housing authority. So yeah, there's ways that you don't have to spend your own money to do this stuff, is what I hope is coming clear. And then the final thing in this toolkit is case studies and profiles of resident councils and public housing authorities that support resident organizing and participation across the country. So there's lots of different groups, and I'll get into that. And there's the website link, same one I said earlier. So what's in the toolkit? The first thing is the guides. And there are 9 guides. Now, unfortunately, not all of these guides are online at the moment, and the tools are also not all online. And I have a feeling, possibly likely due to the current goons in charge, that there's some language in some of these documents that isn't appropriate, isn't PC, as it were. And so they took them down. But I, a few years ago, downloaded the kit anyway. So I have the full kit. And I'm going to send that to the House Our Neighbors team. So they'll have it and potentially be able to disperse it. And you can also contact me. And that will be up on the screen soon. But yeah, there are 9 guides, and they are organizing and running resident councils, engaging residents and representing resident interests, holding effective resident council meetings, partnering in advocacy with the housing authority, advisory boards and the housing authority plan process, partnering with local and community organization. That's the guide that's not up online anymore. Resident training and self-sufficiency programs, resident management corporations, and tenant participation funds. So each of these has a lot of information in them. And as you can see, a lot of them are around the council themselves, but a lot of them are around the details of the specifics, like tenant participation funds. And so I would highly recommend reading through all of them and then, drilling in down on specifics. And these are some of the case studies that they highlight in the guide. And so around the country, there are lots of examples of these groups that are organizing and can give you some support. There are lots of organizations as well in the national level in terms of tenant organizations. So lots of us tenant advocates, we are very excited to help those of you who are interested in getting involved in this. So do not feel shy about reaching out to somebody who puts themselves out there as a resident leader. The people who are listed in this, if they're still around and in this work, would probably very likely be excited to hear from you and how your issues might be similar to what they were dealing with at the time. And here are some resources that we have. They're a community, government, and nonprofit. Oh, I forgot to put House Our Neighbors. That's the spotted nonprofit that's blank. But you're in this webinar, so I think you know about House Our Neighbors. So community. In the Puget Sound region, we have Puget Sound Tenants Union, which I mentioned earlier. They have a great toolkit themselves, guides in order to support you in doing your tenant organizing. I know they also meet in Cal Anderson Park every Wednesday night at 6:30, I believe, might be 7, but you can go to the website, soundtenants.org, to get all the information about that. And they are currently running a campaign in order to shut down a program called RUBS. You may have seen flyers about that. And it's about utility billing. And I'm not going to get into that wonkiness. Luckily, I don't have to deal with that one, but I very highly encourage you to check that out because you might be coming to your building soon if you're not in a HUD building. Seattle Renter Organizing Council is another group that I actually am part of. We are organizing mostly around legislative issues. We work a lot with the council on creating legislation around renter support, renter services, and a lot of that is supported by the organization Be Seattle. And Transit Riders Union is the other organization that I do a lot of advocacy with and is also supporting the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. Seattle Transit Riders Union, you may heard of because of our new mayor, Katie Wilson, helped found it. And so, lots of renters, lots of people living in affordable housing ride transit. So it's a transit issue. And then government. These are a few in the middle resources that you can get. Seattle.gov/renting in Seattle, King County Housing Services, and the Washington Resident Landlord Tenant Act. That's the Washington state laws around how residents and landlords are supposed to act with each other. And then nonprofits. So these are groups, large groups that can help you with resident organization, tenant development, and all that. So Solid Ground and Northwest Justice Project. Solid Ground is more of a community-focused support, and then Northwest Justice Project could help you with the legal resources. So you always want to check all of your legal documents with a lawyer, get them checked out with a lawyer before you make into any agreements with the housing authority. And conclusion. I think from all of the stuff you have heard today, you can hear my best advice in this process is to get involved, right? I believe our world is shaped by those who show up, and we need all of us to be involved in order to create the best world possible. And you have a right to organize with your neighbors. You have a right to organize with your neighbors to improve your homes, and you have a lot of folks out there to support you. So thank you so much for hanging out with me here today and listening to a little bit about how you can be supported in developing your resident council in your properties and homes. And if you want to get in touch with me, my current easiest thing to look at is my coffee.com/sound meaning. And I'm going to be updating that soon. So right now it's a little bit, yeah, but that is how you can reach me. And if you send me a message asking for the full kit, I will go ahead and send you an email. I have the zip file all ready to go. So thank you again so much. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. Happy to have questions and start a conversation.
Thank you so much. Can we get some appreciation